Hi, this is Greg. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. We'll make sure you guys can hear me okay. All right, so let's see if you guys can hear me. Let me know. Let me make sure I have the settings correct. Hi, this is Greg. We're going to get started in a couple minutes. We'll make sure you guys can hear me okay. All right, so if you guys have any questions, please feel free to kind of type them in, and we'll make sure to go through all the different topics. Probably some more people jumping in online here, so we'll wait a couple minutes. For those watching afterwards on YouTube, we're just getting everyone logged in so we can get some questions asked. So we'll get started in a few minutes. All right, great. It's good to see you online, Taylor. And Albert, good to see you too. Okay, so. So if I could ask Albert, what do you want to do with your LFO plugin? All right, we'll see if we have some more people kind of joining in a couple minutes. Taylor, I have your questions that you had emailed earlier today. We have some more people joining in. So once again, if you have questions, we'll go ahead. Okay, so we'll go over some of the audio recording. Okay, so I see the question about the vocoder. So we used to have a vocoder that we used to bundle, and I think you could still run it perhaps as a legacy within the legacy plugin set. But there's a number of shareware plugins. Okay, so we'll go over some Vari audio. I'm just going to type a little list for myself here, but thanks for the question, Nathan. I think that's Jimmy George who just logged in. Good to see you, Jimmy. Okay, so we'll go ahead and so if you have more questions from people watching, feel free to kind of type them in and introduce yourself, where you're from. Get started in a couple minutes for those watching kind of online. We'll let people get logged in. I see your question, Daryl, about very audio, working with polyphonic material. It's really designed for monophonic audio material at this point. I haven't heard of any plans for, but I only know kind of what's available currently. But currently it's only working with monophonic audio for very audio. I'm sure that there's someone that's working on it, but I can't say for certain. All right, other questions that people have, feel free to go ahead and type it in. And good to see you, Jamie from Atlanta. I like your Facebook group, the Cubase Academy. All right, so we'll wait just a couple more minutes, see if people are getting logged in, and then we'll get started. All right, good to see John and Daryl. Thanks for introducing yourself, telling us where you're from. So wait just a couple more minutes and get started. For those who are tuning in, we're still just kind of getting everyone logged in and getting some questions posted. I have a lot of people from Manhattan tonight. So I recognize some people that come to our New York Club Cubase that we have. So good to see you guys. If you're not aware of that group, we meet the first Thursday at 7 o'clock at the Guitar Center on 14th Street. All right, Nathan from Jacksonville, great town. All right, we'll see if you have any more questions that you guys want. We have some new people just logged in. Again, if you want to just kind of pop in, introduce yourself, where you're from, and then if you have questions that you want to go over tonight, we'll be happy to kind of... great. We have someone from the UK watching. You're up late. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, so there's a little bit of a latency. So sometimes when you ask questions, it could be a minute before you hear my response. We had just a question from Stephen Letness. I probably pronounced your name incorrectly. About other weekly regular audio Cubase podcasts in iTunes or Stitcher. There probably are. I haven't really followed them, so we're just kind of doing this like once a month. All right, Taylor from Pine Grove, Pennsylvania. It's great. In Hazleton, I have family from there, as you know. All right, Daryl, we'll go over the virtual amp rack. Yeah, you could definitely use it for bass. I'm a bass player, so I really like some of the amp models there. All right, so we'll We have a couple more people just joining in. We'll get started in just about a minute. Other questions that you guys have, feel free to kind of ask them in the comments section. All right. Thanks, Mark. And people from Minneapolis and Sudbury, Massachusetts. It's great. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. If you have questions or comments as we're kind of going on, please feel free just to kind of ask as we're going on, and I'll try to catch it. There is a little bit of a delay from what I say to from when I say it. It's could be one podcast. It was up to about 15 minutes, so it could be a little tricky. So if you kind of respond to something, you may not hear it for a little while. But we'll go ahead and Taylor had emailed me a couple of questions. One was how to do a mono mix to kind of check your mix to make sure that it's going to actually carry over and make sense when listening to a mono file. Okay, I see Charles' question. All right, so great to see Dave from the Detroit Club Cubase. Had a great time there last week. All right, so we'll go over how to do a mono mix, and then since we're there, we'll also go into the Q mix. All right, so we'll go over those two topics. So a lot of times when you're doing we always think that mixes are going to be listened to in stereo, and it's pretty common that people are listening to in stereo either with earbuds or headphones or stereo speakers or in their cars or whatever listening environment. But obviously there's a whole slew of devices that just have one speaker, like every iPad, the majority of phones. You want to make sure that when you're doing a mix that you don't kind of leave out a lot of different elements when we're actually doing the mix itself, so that when it's listened to in a mono environment that you're not kind of missing key elements. So if we take a look at our mixer to start off, we can we see our mixer. Let me just kind of get this zoomed in just a little bit here and activate a couple things. Now we have a function in the mixer called the control room, and you could activate the control room itself just by kind of making sure that if you click right here, you can see the control room mixer. You could turn it on and have it integrated within the mixer itself. Or you could go to your device menu and you could have a control room mixer that's kind of a free floating window here. Now the control room, the initial intention was to actually make sure that we had a separate monitoring volume that was independent and didn't affect the gain structure applied in the mix, applied from the master fader here. We would get a lot of calls from people that were kind of using their master fader as basically their monitoring volume, or what on a typical console would be your control room volume. Then they would do an export audio mix down, and at that point they would actually get to the point where if they had their fader down significantly, that they would have a very kind of weak sounding mix. And so we created the control room so that we could have your master fader here set with your gain structure, but we could have your volume control here that's independent. And this is just solely your monitoring volume. So when you go to the control room, you could actually go to your main mix here, and you could actually see on the monitors, and you could have kind of some different areas here, and you could have different monitors set up. So if you're working with several different monitors, you could actually just come right here and say, okay, I want to listen to the mix of my Genelex or my Yamahas, my Auratone, or my Focal. Now, these monitors can be in different configurations, and these configurations are defined in the VST connections window. So if I wanted to have a 5.1 Genelex system in stereo, Yamaha, Auratone, or Focal monitors, I could have all those set up right there. But in previous versions of the control room, you'd have a little icon just to the right of the speaker, which would allow you to do down mix presets. I believe it was introduced in 7.5.2, and they did kind of a cosmetic change to some of the functions in the control room. Now you could actually just go right here to your down mix presets. So if you're listening to something that's in like a surround 5.1, we could actually just go right here and have your down mix presets, and we can say, okay, I want to fold it down to stereo or just fold it down to mono. So you could just do this and switch to check your mono compatibility directly here in the control room. So this way you're still kind of outputting your stereo mix, and you say, now I just want to listen to it as mono, I want to listen to it in stereo or mono. I believe also if you come here and as a plugin, you might find it under surround, you can see a mix convert plugin as well. So if you come here, you could actually say, I want to have my stereo track, then just down mix to mono, and you could turn this plugin on and off, and you could use that as a way to do your mono down mix check. So basically, it's a great way to just kind of make sure that you have mono compatibility, because it's actually probably more important now than it has been in many years, because so many people are listening to music on their tablets and phones, that we can now just kind of make sure that the mono mix is going to work in those listening environments, which is pretty typical. Now we had a question from Charles about setting up Q-Sends and doing reverb to a singer without applying the reverb to everything being sent. So if you wanted to come here within, and this kind of ties into the control room as well, where we could have multiple Q mixes. So we could have up to 4 different Q mixes. So let's say in this example, if I'm listening to my track and maybe I have a little bit of bass, drums, and guitars, and I want to have different Q mixes for each of the individual musicians, we could go to our racks directly here, and we could now just say, okay, I want to take to make sure that we have our Qs visible in the racks, and then once we have our Qs visible, we can just come right here and we could see that these will be our Q mixes, or how much of this signal is sent to the Q, or sometimes called a headphone mix. So as we were working on this, we could actually say, okay, I want to take my bass track here, and I could just kind of turn it on and adjust my Q send right there like that. Now it's incredibly tedious to do this for every single track in a large mix like this. But some great shortcuts are, if you want to select all the different tracks, we can now just come right over here, and I'm going to, as we have the different tracks selected, I'm just going to, and we could do this quickly by selecting the top track and our visibility pane in the mixer, and selecting the bottom track, but holding down a shift key as we do that. Then we can select all of our different tracks. So often when we're doing scenarios like this, we want it to be a more me headphone mix. It's kind of a colloquialism to describe this, where each musician wants to hear a little bit more of themselves. So I'm going to activate the quick link feature. And now what I could do is, once I come over here into the control room, I am able to, now let's say if I wanted to go to my Qs, I could right click, and I'm going to select all Qs, and I'm going to say, let's enable all the Qs. We're going to activate the Q sends, all the Q sends, and all of the selected tracks. Now, as we've done that, we can now right click again, and what we want to do is kind of replicate our mix. So again, to do the more me headphone mix, I'm going to say, let's use the current mix levels. And what that's going to do is we're going to see the mix be replicated here across all of my different tracks. And now that's done. We'll do one more click and say, let's use the current pan settings. And now our panning is set up. So if I wanted to come right over here, I could select all of my drum tracks. And now that the quick link is active, and we could do this temporarily by holding down Shift plus Alt or Shift plus Option on Mac. And then now that I have all of my drums selected, I could send more of the drum mix to the drummer. And let's say if I want to take the bass and send more bass to the bass player's headphone mix, and we could now select the guitars. And as we slide over here, we can now send more guitars to our guitar Q mix. Now, if I wanted to audition these Q mixes, we can now click right here and we see Q1, Q2, 3, and 4. So if I wanted to listen to my mix, and now to the drummer's headphone mix, what we could send them, or the bassist, or guitars. And let's say the guitars still want more. To the bassist Q mix, the drummer's headphone mix. Into the mix here. Now, once we actually click here on the actual Q mix, we could have some additional controls for each of the Q mixes as well. For instance, the singer may want to not hear the click track coming in their headphone mix, but the guitarist, bass player, and drummer do. So once we have the control room tab clicked on top, we get these settings. But if I click here, and this is going to Charles' question, to the setup, we can now have our individual effects. So if I wanted to come here to my different Q mixes, we could say, okay, let's just grab my Q mix. And now you could have your different effects for the Q mix right here. So that way, just that Q mix can have and hear just that effect. So once you have the control room tab clicked on top, and then the setup tab clicked on the bottom, you're able to have your different effects going directly in your Q mix. Now, one thing that's really helpful is a lot of the Steinberg audio interfaces have built-in DSP. So like some of these interfaces, like I'm currently using a UR44. So if I wanted to come here and I could now kind of look at this inputs, and sometimes when you do effects in Q mixes in a computer world, it could be a little tricky because sometimes you may say, okay, I just want to see particular types of channels, but now and those effects can impose latency. But once I have like a UR interface, like the UR44, the UR28M, the UR824, or the MR816X or MR816CSX, they have built-in DSP on the units themselves. So if I wanted to come here, I could say, okay, let's go to my VST connections, and I'll just kind of set an input channel here. So let's say I'm using input 1 of my UR44. I can now see a little hardware tab. And once I go to my hardware tab here, let me just go to my racks. We'll activate our hardware. At this point, I could just have my reverb, and since this is part of the hardware itself, we could actually get to the point where this reverb we can monitor with no perceptible latency. In addition to that, we could also have built-in effects. So if I wanted to have, I could invert my phase, or if you wanted to have different guitar amps as well, you could just come here, and this would allow you to have compression, EQ, and 4 different types of guitar amps, plus the reverb that you can monitor with 0 latency, and you have your send amount here. So that input, you could actually have different amounts of send. In addition to that, you could use these as plugins. So if I wanted to just open up my inserts, we had the same exact DSP capabilities as plugins. So if I wanted to go to my distortion, I could just say, okay, let's say, okay, this, I like the sound of that so much, I just wanted to run it as an insert effect, or it's running off of my CPU, where it's not as time critical. Or if I wanted to go to my dynamics, we could just say, okay, let's go to the morphing channel strip, and now we could have your EQ and dynamics as native based plugins, or as 0 latency or imperceptible latency powered by the hardware itself. So that's one of the unique features of the actual Steinberg DSP integration. But again, you could come here to the control setup, control room tab on top, and then go to the setup here. And then on each of these, you could have up to 8 different plugins. So if you wanted to monitor with, you know, guitar, amp models, you could do that as well. So does that make sense? If you have questions on that, please go ahead and you know, type in the comments field. Now we also had a question about using Hangout Sonic SE and wanting to do layers. And this is very common. Maybe you want like a piano sound in your right hand and a bass sound in your left hand. So we're going to come here to our VST instruments, and we're going to add a rack instrument, and we'll start off with Hangout Sonic SE, since everyone has that as part of their Cubase. Sorry about the plosive there. All right, so we're going to go ahead and create a track, and we want to do a layer. Now, Hangout Sonic SE, even though it comes with Cubase, it's an incredibly powerful engine for playing back sounds. So let's say if I wanted to load up different sounds. So let's say I want to do like an acoustic piano. We have a great Yamaha S90 ES sample. So how this is going to be laid out is MIDI channel 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way through 16. So it's 16-part multi-timbral. And let's say now at this point I wanted to add like a bass sound. So we're going to come right over here, and we'll scroll up. So say I want an acoustic bass. So say I want a upright bass on MIDI channel 2. All right, now even though this is on MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, we could actually think of these as slots. So when I actually go to the MIDI tab here, at this point we could just drag these little boundaries, or you could actually just say, okay, I want my high key, and we could just kind of use your scroll wheel here, or you could just drag, get your mouse correct. So now we could say, okay, up until this range, we're going to hear the bass. And then what we want to do is to make sure that these are assigned onto the same MIDI channel. So now, as soon as I come here, we can say, okay. And that's how you could do your split. Just like that. Now you could also do some other kind of creative, interesting things like this. So if you wanted to go to MIDI channel 2, and let's say I just wanted to easily layer 2 different sounds. So let's say I wanted to have an acoustic piano, and I wanted this to be layered with an organ patch. Now that they're both on the same MIDI channel, I could just layer just like that. And I could also say, okay, maybe I want the, and I do a lot of like creative stuff with octaves in MIDI, I find. So now I can say I want the organ to be an octave higher than the original piano sound. So now I could also go here to my mix and say, okay, I want the piano to be louder than the drawbar organ. So that way you could easily layer sounds or do splits just that easily. Now here we could also set velocity ranges. So you could say, okay, at this velocity, I will only want this sound to come in at this velocity range. So as you hit this sound, the organ will come in. And again, we could adjust within the mix here so you could hear it a little bit better. So we go to our MIDI. We could also say only at the higher velocities do the organs come in. So it makes it super fast to do like really quick layers. And you could also have different MIDI controllers. So if you wanted to sustain to work on the piano but not on the organ, or if you wanted the modulation wheel to only work on the organ but not affect the piano patch, you could do stuff like that as well. So just by clicking on MIDI, you'll have kind of the range, the ability to layer, and again by freely assigning the MIDI channels, you can set your velocity range as well as controllers, and here also transposition. So and then once you have that all done, you could save it as a preset, and you could make like really thick stacks and layers just like that. So all right, so let's we'll go ahead and take a look, see if you guys have questions on that. Okay, we'll see. I'm just going to review some questions, and then we have a question about kind of recording the audio from different MIDI instruments. Let's make sure I'm not missing any points here. All right, I'm just going to refresh so we can see all the different comments coming in. All right, so one of the things that we want to do is to come up with a couple of creative ways to come up and turn virtual instruments into audio tracks. I don't have Machine loaded up, but I think you'll find that the principles will be identical here. Let me just load up a different project here. Okay, we could do it from this one to start off with. So if I wanted to come here and I have, let's say, a drum kit loaded up, and here within this I could actually have up to 16 different drum pads. And I can have 16 pads per bank, and I can have 8 banks. So that gives me up to 128 pads. And we also have 16 stereo outputs into our mixer. So a lot of times you can play back your files here, and it's generating audio. So the virtual instrument is receiving MIDI information and generating digital audio that's played back through your audio interface. So as we do this, we can now route these to different outputs. So one of the ways that we can turn like a multi-track input is we could do some internal routing. So if I wanted to take the outputs here of this groove agent, so I believe this is the one that's kind of open right here. And if we wanted to create within our device menu, we go to our VST connections, I could add an output bus. Now, what's interesting is this bus doesn't really have to be routed anywhere. So I'm just going to call this output bus goes nowhere. Now, I could also create kind of a phantom group channel. So I'm going to right click here, and we'll say, let's go to a group channel, and we'll hit add track. And again, this doesn't have to be routed to anywhere. So we'll say no bus. So if I wanted to take the virtual instrument outputs here, so let's say we're playing this, and I wanted to add an audio track, and I'm going to add 2 stereo tracks. So we'll just call this, from our bus, and our next one from group. And what I could do is we're going to take the audio track here in the mixer. So I'm just going to go to my mix console. And what we could do is actually send this out to different outputs. So if I wanted to just kind of go to my channel settings here, let's see if this is just a MIDI track here. All right, so we'll come right here to the audio capabilities. And on the sends, one of the sends, I'm going to send it to our goes nowhere. And we're going to turn that on. And as far as our routing, we could also just kind of send this, instead of to our master, we could send it to our group track. And we can say group 1. And then for this, we could say we're going to take this from our outputs. And then we're going to take the input here from our groups, and then we can just record enable these right here, and then as we hit record, at that point we could just come right here and we could just record all of your outputs right there. So now as I do this, if I wanted to do like multiple outputs, I have a project kind of set up for this where we'll just call it track versions. So I'll just jump right here. Okay, so I see some I see some more questions come in. We'll go through those. So what I've done here is I've set up each of these as groups. So I've taken each of the outputs here. So once I go to my instrument page, and I've routed these to different outputs. So as I do this now, if I wanted to play back this pattern, I could place all these tracks into record. And I could do this quickly for multiple tracks just by adding these to a folder track. So once we go to folder track, we're going to say move to selected tracks to new folder, and I could arm just a folder track. And as I play back this pattern, each of the individual instruments is now going to a different group output, and then it's being, those groups in turn are set as the inputs for this channel. So that way in one pass I could do 16 tracks of audio and have those individually recorded. So you could route it through different groups or through outputs, and you don't necessarily have to have the physical I/O capability to actually use that, because it's all kind of done internally. So it's almost like kind of an internal busing mechanism that allows you to do that. Okay, so I think we had a quick question about multiple virtual instruments to the same MIDI input. So let me just get that set up, and let me just look. I'll take a quick look for the mute groups as well. All right. And the question about DSP effects, can they be used on mixdown? I believe that's in reference to the UR interface question. So if you want to use those for mixdown, that's when you use the software versions of the plugins. So you could definitely use those same effects on your mixdown process as well. All right, so let's say if I have a number of different, we'll do a new project here. We'll do an empty. So just reread the question here. Okay, so let's say if we have, let's say 8 MIDI tracks here. Now let's go ahead and load up Hangout Sonic SE. Let's get the scenario set up here for the multiple inputs. Oh, let me just not do that. Let me just remove this one track one more time here. Sorry. All right, so I think we want to be able to take the same. I'm going to reread the question about multiple virtual instruments taking the same MIDI input. So let me add a couple of instruments here. So let's say we'll add and let's say this is going to the Grand and this one's going to Hangout Sonic SE. So now what we're able to do, if you want to set the input, you're going to hold down the shift key. And I believe if we just say, okay, we want this coming from our UR44 input. Let me see if I get my key modifier correctly. So if you want them to all be assigned to the same MIDI port, all you have to do is select them all. And let's say hold down Shift plus Alt or Shift plus Option. And then all those tracks will be set to the same MIDI input port. So now if we set it to our Steinberg UR44, we can now just look and all those tracks are assigned to the same MIDI input. So I think that was answering your question about getting multiple virtual instruments taking the same MIDI input. If I misunderstood, just please go ahead and just let me know. About the question about sharing my track template, if you want, templates can be a little, personal depending on your setup and I/O. I can make a template if you want me to for you, but I'm not sure if my routing and I/O makes sense with what you're doing for your question. All right, so I see another question about the chord track. So let's take a quick look at chord track, which is kind of a very cool, exciting way of, a great compositional aid. Someone just kind of wrote a comment and that was, too close to cheating recently on one of my tutorial videos. And this is kind of very unique to Steinberg because we want you to actually be able to kind of write songs. Okay, okay, so I think I'm just getting a clarification on the multiple inputs. Okay, so if you have one MIDI part and you want it to go to multiple VSTs, Okay, we can show that real quick. Let me just do new project. So one quick way, and this is if you wanted to do perhaps a layer, like maybe you want like 4 different string patches layered. So if you come here, you have a MIDI track, and I believe it works the same way with instrument tracks. We'll just make sure. So if we have a MIDI track, one way of doing this, let's say if I have multiple instruments open again, like let's say I have Mystic, and let's say Retrolog, and let's do a Prologue or Pad Shop. So one quick way of layering and sending like one MIDI track out to multiple instruments is to kind of use the MIDI sends. So often you have MIDI sends being used as kind of for plugins, where you could say, okay, I want to take this, and you have MIDI inserts that will actually route and have different arpeggiators and stuff like that. But you could also just kind of route these to different sends. So if you have, let's say here you wanted to go to Mystic, and then you could turn this on. Turn on the send here. You wanted to go to the Retrolog, and you wanted to go to Pad Shop. So now when you have MIDI data, that will then send it out to that one track. In addition to its normal output routing, you can send it to, with the MIDI sends, up to 4 additional tracks and have layers built. So I think that kind of makes what you wanted to do. So that way, all those VST instruments can respond exactly to that one part. So I hope that makes sense. If not, just kind of make a quick comment. We'll move on to the chord track. Sorry about that. All right, so coming up with initial song ideas could be challenging for a lot of our customers, and maybe they don't have such a great grasp of harmony or music theory. It could be tough. I see all sorts of tutorials of music harmony or in theory lessons for producers online and stuff. But a lot of us may start off with like just a basic drum part. Now what I've done is I've loaded up like a Fender Rhodes patch here, and we've added a chord track just by right-clicking and saying Add Chord Track. So what I can do now is I can just kind of enter in values with my pencil tool and say, okay, I want an F chord. And I could click here and I could just navigate. And if you use your arrow keys on your computer keyboard, you could say, okay, I want an F chord, arrow over to next chord to B flat, and then to a C chord. Now, if you don't have an idea or you're stuck musically on what chord works well between like a B flat major and a C chord, you could double click on that chord and go to the chord assistant. And now what you could do is it could actually give you harmonically correct chord suggestions, and you have varying levels of complexity here. So you can have G minor chord. Now if you wanted to change the chord voicings, we could select all the chords here. And now you can say, okay. Or if you want to do different first inversion or second inversion. Or for piano, guitar, different voicings like that. Now if you drag it to a MIDI track, it'll actually just make those MIDI parts right there for you. Now the chord track gets to be really interesting when we actually take like an additional part here. And if we wanted to tell different tracks that are already composed that we wanted to follow the chord. So if I select this track, I could say, let's follow the chord. So as I come here, now as I enter in chord values, I can say G, going to an E minor, and now you can watch all the MIDI parts just change accordingly. And let's say, let's add in our chord here, and let's make it a C. Let's make it a D7 chord. And all those parts will just change. And this is also kind of really ideal for if you're a composer. I could take all these parts and just kind of enter in. And instead of going through each part, you could just kind of listen to it here. Say I probably want to turn around there. Let's say I want that to be an E chord or an F sharp minor. And G major going to, let's say, an A7. So anytime that you change chords here, it'll just automatically. And even retroactively, we'll go back and change the parts. Now we can be a little more interesting with perhaps if people start off doing a different chord progression, or maybe they start off with something that was, you know, the genesis kind of came, or the inspiration came from a piano part, and maybe you don't know quite all the different chord voicings that were played. We can now actually just take a piano part here. So if we wanted to just kind of come here, so we could see, and I had someone who asked me a question about this on the last Google Hangout when they saw all these additional lines in the key editor, and that's just the note expression data. So if you wanted to just hide that information, you could click on this icon here. So let's take a look at this piano part. So if I wanted to look at it in notation, just kind of how it looks. And now if I wanted to just look at the part here, okay, so typical piano part. Now I'm going to right click, go to the chord track, and I'm going to say make chords. And what this has done now is an analysis of the actual piano part, and it's laid out all the chords from that piano part itself. So once we do this, you know, we could do some interesting things. Perhaps maybe your keyboard skills could be stronger. So we could actually take a track here, and I'm going to open up my virtual keyboard. And as we do this, I'm going to just click right here. I'm going to use kind of my actual QWERTY keyboard here. All right, and for some reason it's not working tonight. And if you wanted to actually just kind of play any chords here, you could actually have those mapped in real time to the chords of the chord track. So if you wanted to just kind of come right here and just kind of pass the MIDI data Let's see if my virtual keyboard for some reason isn't working tonight, but you could do that. Now, the chord track also can tie directly into the Very Audio editor. So if I double click here, and we go to the Very Audio editor, and I'll just take that part right here. So let's listen to our vocals, and we had some questions on the Very Audio editor. So one of the things you could do is actually colorize based on the chord track. So when you go to the colors, so I see that I have green notes, I have blue notes, and a red note here. So sometimes what this enables you to show is that the green notes are falling within the defined chord. And then we also have the capability of having blue notes that fall within the scale and red notes that fall out of scale. So if I wanted to just listen to my vocal here. So if I wanted to change the notes here, and I say, let's just move this, and I say, oh, let's just move it up a third. That often doesn't work harmonically. So we can kind of hear, so that doesn't work musically. But if I move it from this origin note to this green note, we can now just kind of. Now, one of the things that a lot of people miss on the Very Audio editor, that's really great tips. If you need to kind of get in between notes, is you could just hold down the Shift key, and that will allow you, like if you have to tune like different vocals and maybe the original vocal is out of tune, you could actually just hold down the Shift key and you could move anywhere in between. So if you want to do kind of microtonal music, or just finding the particular perfect blue note, you could do that. Now, if you see segments, also, there's two different edit modes here. So you have pitch and warp and segments, and you switch between these by hitting the tab key. So if you needed to just kind of cut segments, so if I go to my segments mode, as you kind of move the tool, you can just say, okay, I want to just, if you go to the bottom, you can just split notes. And then if you wanted to go back to your pitch and warp, so you could try stuff. So if you need to kind of do, or if you need to do time compression of the note to make it longer or shorter, you could just kind of take those particular notes right here. And there's also a lot of stuff you could do by just kind of dragging the pitch handles. And if you wanted to just perhaps grab just the end of a pitch handle, but not the entire note, if you come here to the very top and double click, you could create an anchor point. So that way it'll only adjust from that particular spot. Now, one preference to be aware of is sometimes if the note is a little bit out of tune, and you move it, the note sometimes may move exactly one semitone up, but a little bit out of tune. The preference, and I have this kind of turned off by default. If you go to the tools under editing, the tool modifiers, and then you'll see the drag and pitch warp tool. So if you turn off the relative pitch snapping, or the absolute pitch and snapping here, if you turn that modifier to none, that way as you kind of move a note, it'll just move directly in tune to the next in tune note, as opposed to being moved up a perfect semitone, but still flat or sharp. Now, one thing that we've had since we have the actual chord track, all right, so now if I wanted to, I could actually select phrases. And since we know what the chords are there, we could actually just select that phrase. And from your audio menu, let's say generate harmony voices. So let's give it 2 harmony voices. And let's just adjust those down a little bit. So now if I wanted to, it gave me a soprano and an alto voice. But if I wanted that to be a tenor, I could just go here to my chord track and say for the voice, give me a tenor voice. And now with the Very Audio 2, I could actually select all three parts, come here, and I could adjust each of those voices. And just change, and I could see which harmonies will work based solely on the colors. So if I move this to a red note, that would probably be bad sounding. So you could do a tremendous amount, not only just with kind of the initial inception for coming up with song ideas and being able to kind of change existing parts, but a lot of great vocal integration with the chord track. So it's really, okay, we'll go ahead and I'm going to boost the volume of the music here a little bit. Okay, do that. Sorry about that. Okay, so we had a couple of questions coming in about the VST Connect. And VST Connect allows you to do internet kind of tracking sessions. And there's two different versions, and this was actually just also released for an iPad version as well just last week. And what this is going to allow you to do is on input channels, and you could actually just kind of start this up right here. And a great way to get this started is to actually, because the routing can be a little tricky, if you go to new project and then go to recording, you'll see a VST Connect SE. And we'll just start this. All right, and what this is going to allow you to do is you could have the performer, and they could be located anywhere in the world as long as they have an internet connection with like 256K upload. They download this from Steinberg.net, and it's called a performer software. So you could run it. So the person that you're recording doesn't have to have Cubase or a Steinberg program. They could just have an audio interface like a UR22 or UR44 and download this program and be able to see, and if they have webcams, you could actually see them. So what you're able to do is you basically put this as an input, as an insert on the input channel. And if you kind of start off with this template, you'll be able to record that person remotely online. Now we could also do MIDI capability, so within Cubase 7.5. Now what's really interesting about this is you have the VST Connect SE, and the person could be now running it as a $5 app on the iTunes store from their iPad using a UR44 as their audio interface. So they download this VST Connect Performer software, again, absolutely free of charge. They don't have to be a Steinberg customer. They log in, and once you're online, you give yourself a name, you log in, this gives you a code. You give that code to the other person, and then they'll have a direct connection with you. You don't have to set up an account, you don't have to give us an email address, you don't have to remember one more password, but you'll be able to then track them remotely. So what happens is you hit record, the audio from your project gets sent out to them. When they hear it, and as they're tracking, all the latencies are compensated for. They record their parts, and then it's recorded directly back into your system as an audio file. And generally, the VST Connect SE will record it as a FLAC file, so it's a free lossless audio codec. So you could actually record stereo tracks free of charge. Now, there's a VST Connect Pro, which will allow you to do up to 16 tracks of uncompressed audio. And if your internet bandwidth isn't really set up for that, we just, you know, what it'll do is actually just kind of download those files directly in the background for you. So this way you could actually do remote recording, you know, from people all over the world, and there's no charge for it. So it's a really great resource. So it's really kind of hard to demonstrate in this environment and some kind of broadcasting online as well, but it'll give you, you know, kind of check it out. It's really impressive technology. So so we'll just kind of check that out. All right, and so we'll move on to some other questions. All right. All right, so just kind of reading through some of the questions. All right, so just kind of reading through some questions. All right, so we had a question about kind of reverb send when soloing. So let me just come back to a particular project. We'll just jump back to the little ballad we were listening to here a minute ago. I'll make sure that the volume is up. Just going to reread the question here.
Can't go on living a lie.
All right, so the question is, please go over how to listen to only the reverb when soloing it, and other effects too. So let's see if we can, let's see if I get this set up in the mixer. All right, so we have our...
Someone tonight.
All right, so do you want to hear, let me just make sure I understand your question correctly, from Jonathan. Do you want to hear only the reverb without the source material? I just wanted to just clarify that real quick.
So afraid to smile, you think that I change my mind. I can't forget when we first met, what I saw in your eyes. How can I feel?
All right, so if you could, I know we have a little bit of latency, but I just want to see if you wanted to hear just a reverb without the actual source material. If you could just kind of go through that, if you could answer that question real quick. Maybe we could come back to that if you want.
How can I see you?
So Jonathan, if you could just kind of just verify if you wanted to. So, you know, you could take kind of the reverb here.
You run and hide from the light. Like a straight line.
Okay, I think I could play around with it, but I think it's going to still need to have the source material present to send to the reverb, kind of like a real console. I might be mistaken. Let me just make sure I have this. All right, so what you need to do is to right click and move it to pre-fader here. So once you do that, move the fader down. And then you're just hearing the wet signal. But if I put it to post fader, we'll just rewind here a little bit. So with post fader reverb, you don't hear the signal. But again, if I move it to pre fader,
So free to smile. You think that I change my mind. I can't forget.
so again, just move it to right click, and then you can move the send to pre fader or post fader, and then just move the fader down. So does that make sense? I know there's a little bit of delay. All right, now we had some questions about VST amp rack. Let's go ahead. Sorry about this. All right. And take a listen to the VST amp rack. I think Nathan's questions about selling the effects track. If you sell the effects track, you could do that, but if there's no track feeding into the effects track, then that can allow you to not hear the different parts. All right, so let's take a look at VST amp rack. Now, what's cool about the VST amp rack is you can use it for a number of different tracks. So, and they paid really careful attention, especially to kind of the physical modeling of the cabinets themselves. So, so you'll have different pre-effects sections. You have 6, 7 different amplifiers here, and they kind of look kind of like classic. So when it says Tweed, you can probably figure out what it is, or a Plexi, or a British Custom. So they kind of look like the amps that they're modeled after. Each of the amps has their associated cabinet, and you can mix and match cabinets. You also have post effects. So if you wanted to add effects here, you could just kind of click on the plus sign, and then you could add different effects. You'll have different microphone positions. So you have 3 off access and 4 on access mics. And you could also just kind of set up some different configurations, and you could have your master section with a tuner, your master volume, and an EQ. But let's go ahead and just kind of listen to some of the different effects. We'll start off with like a classic blues kind of track, and we'll go ahead and bypass. So if I want to come here and just kind of, switch the cabinet. Or adjust the mic positioning. Say more dynamic mic. Or the EQ. Or let's say you want a classic kind of Marshall. And again, we'll bypass. So if you want to add like a wah or flanger, you can just come right here. You could also click here and have it tempo synced for all the different effects. Or different cabinets. classic blues lead. And again, a direct sound. And we'll go ahead and jump to the next. So let's say a bass. This is what the original question was for. So I just kind of use one of the Fender amps here. It's a very kind of amp-heggy. It's a direct bass. And switch out cabinets. So. Or if you want to have classic overdrive. So direct. Kind of a classic Vox. Again, I want to come here to the effects rack. You have your pre-effects. So even the tremolo here. Or a classic 62 Strat. So that way you come up with a lot of like pretty amazing guitar tones, a really wide variety. Plus you have all the different effects racks built in, the effects pedal boards built in as pre or post, and then you have the capability of mixing and matching all those different amps and cabinets to get a wide variety of sounds for guitar and bass. All right, so let's take a look. I saw some more questions kind of coming in. All right, so we had a question about some basic like audio editing concepts and commands. One of the things that you have in Cubase is a tremendous amount of capability with the audio editing right from the main project window that a lot of people often kind of overlook. And it's really and one of the great things is the ability of just right-clicking and being able to access all of your tools. So a lot of times you may see your toolbar that looks like a small toolbar like this, and there's a preference when you come right over here to the preferences, to tools, and you can say pop-up toolbar on right click. And if you have that preference checked, when I right click you get kind of the smaller toolbar. I personally prefer to see kind of the full gamut of tools, and especially if you don't kind of remember what the tools are. You could do this. Plus, this gives you context-sensitive menu options, which are really, really handy, especially if you're using kind of multiple monitors or multiple screens simultaneously. So if you're on a third or fourth screen, you don't always have to go back to your main menus on your primary screen. For dealing with audio, some of the main things, I'm just going to go ahead and split this, but, just kind of right-clicking the tools here. There's a number of ways of kind of, once you have an audio part, once you have the cursor tool over it, if I wanted to do a fade in, I could just grab my upper left-hand handle. Or if I wanted to do a fade out, I could just do my fade outs just like that. My bottom handles will allow me to adjust, and there's 3 different modes for the bottom handles. And I'm not, with the fades, I'm not limited to just straight linear fade. If I double click, I could actually edit my fade and just say, okay, I want that as my fade in, and I could hit apply, and I could save that as a preset if I'm so inclined. You could also have stereotypical fade in, fade out presets like logarithmic. If you hold down the Alt and Control key, you can actually slip the audio. So if a part is a little early or a little bit late, so that's the option. I believe it's Option Control on Mac and Alt Control on PC. So you could adjust your fades just like that. Your bottom handles will allow you to adjust the sizing of different events. So if I wanted to say this event ends here, but there's 3 different sizing modes. So if you just hit the 1 key, and these will be your keyboard shortcuts of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, etc. We could also do sizing moves content. So now if I could say, I need that end to fall at a very specific point, or I need the beginning to fall at a very specific point. There's also sizing applies time stretch. So if I wanted to come right here, I could say just make that audio fit into that amount of space, and it'll just time compress and speed up. Now, if I don't like any of the edits that I've done so far in this audio, we have unlimited levels of undo. So I've done 30 some edits here. So I could just simply scroll through my undo history here. And at that point, we could have all of our undo history just tailored right there for us. Now, as I work with this, another thing that's very helpful is as I cut, and you can see all my changes being made here, I could adjust just my volume of the clip by grabbing my upper center handle here. So as I wanted to just grab my upper center handle, I could adjust the volume. And this is like really handy if you have a vocal and perhaps like one phrase was, or if you wanted to knock out a particular phrase up or down, you could just kind of split that selection and adjust that. And it comes in very handy also for breaths. Now, if you find yourself when you actually cut and copy your different bits of audio here, if it's not allowing you to cut kind of, like only with a grid, you could just disable the snap value here. And you could do that by hitting the letter J. So if you had like a really loud before a vocal part, you could just simply select that range right there, and we'll zoom in. And as you just kind of take that, we can now just adjust just that, or if you wanted to bring it up in volume. In addition to your fade curve handles here, your event clip handles, you could also just grab your drawing tool and just draw in volume changes. And below, you'll have kind of all of your automation data as well. So if you wanted to just automate your different parts, you could do that directly below. Now, if you wanted to, again, kind of split, erase, you wanted to zoom in, these are all just accessing tools. And if you double click, you could just, in a blank area, you go, that's kind of your undo history for zooms. Now, something else that's very powerful with the audio editing inside of Cubase is this concept of if I wanted to do offline processing. So if I want to take this audio here, and let me just process this audio and say, okay, I wanted this to do a fade in, and I wanted this to increase in gain, let's say 8 dB. So we'll go ahead and make that audio 8 dB louder. And let's say if I wanted to run it through a particular plugin, I could say let's run it through do something interesting, the ring modulator plugin. So now I could just basically do all this offline processing of my plugins. And a lot of times when people do this, they may not work this way because they could be committed to having all these changes. So if I wanted to listen to my audio, I could just kind of take a quick listen to it here. And let's say if I've totally kind of destroyed the audio, but I've saved a file and I gave it to someone else, we could come right over here to our offline process history. Select a file here. Sorry about that. And we see our offline process history. And at this point, I could say, let's just remove just the fade in from that edit. Or if I wanted, and it'll keep all the other changes. So if I say, let's just come here and remove the ring modulator, even after saving, I can, in a non-linear fashion, remove each of the offline processes just that easily, so at any time in the process. So if I've done 30 edits, I could take out number 17 without affecting any of the other edits and have it be completely non-linear in that way. So a lot of things you could do incredibly fast, powerful, and fluid. And I think, one of the things that you see people are often envious of how fast people can edit their audio in Cubase or Nuendo versus other programs, because it's kind of so fast once you kind of get into the groove of it, with your unlimited levels of undo, your offline process history, kind of the fluidity of all of the editing functions right there. So it gets to be a very powerful editing environment. And again, you can customize your keyboard shortcuts to do anything you want on particular tracks. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions on that, go ahead and leave them. You can go ahead and type it out. And one thing that was added for Cubase 7.5 that's really handy is now it'll automatically do your transient detection in the background. So if you have an audio file here, you can just hit, if you have the track selected, you can just hit Alt-N, or I believe it's, just Alt-N and Alt-B, and that will allow you to kind of navigate to the different transients, and you could right-click and kind of change your grid structure right there. Okay, so let's so we had some questions if YouTube will be this will be posted on YouTube, so you'll be able to kind of watch this offline. All right, so let's go ahead and see if we have some more questions filtering in. Okay, so we have a question about the LFO tool. So, so if you come here, one of the things that could you tell me what you want to do with the LFO tool, Albert? Just out of curiosity. some more questions. I'm going to go through and just kind of cycle through some of the other questions, make sure I didn't miss some questions that came in the middle here. I know there's a lot of delay. So we have some comments on that. Yeah, I can't really control that, unfortunately. So, see if you guys have more questions. I'll kind of hang, and we'll see if we get, see if we get the buffer kind of caught up a little bit. All right, so did you want to do like add vibrato to a particular type of track? Okay, we'll go over some of the track versions. Charles had a question on that, but let's see. I'm just gonna go ahead and exit out of my Cubase real quick. Sometimes having so many live things open at one time. Just give me 1 second here. I'm gonna exit out of my Cubase. Go ahead, just restart my Cubase. Sometimes with the Google Hangouts here, it's a little tricky. All right, so let me just open up this file here. Just let me get this switched over so you can see my screen. All right, so we should be back here in a second. Okay, so let's take a look for Albert's question. So if we have an audio track, I think if you wanted to kind of add some vibrato, if you come over here, maybe let's take a look. Sometimes some of the plugins, like I don't know if you played around with some of the tremolos here. That could definitely kind of add some vibratos. So under your rotary speaker could probably also deal with that. There might be a better tool for that. I could do some research, but also you might see some of it within some of the different filters. So if I wanted to look at my filter types here, you may see some of the presets. Let me just go through a couple more of the different filter plugins. So, using some of your different filters, I think you could, depending on exactly what you wanted to do with that, you could definitely kind of add different vibratos and stuff like that. Okay, so let me just go ahead and read through some of our questions. We have some more that are coming in. We'll get to the track versions, and then we have some questions about samples. Okay, there's a question about protecting a project from misbehaving plugins. You said about using Play regularly, and it kind of increases save times. Sometimes, we can't really do a whole lot if other plugins have been misbehaving. Sometimes giving them more memory can help significantly as well. So, making sure that you're running everything in 64-bit can really kind of make a big difference. I see I believe it's Jonathan's question about different samples and getting them kind of lined up for remixing and getting tempo right first. Okay, we'll go through that. Okay, so we'll go through some of the tempo detection stuff and after track versions. Okay, so let's do little track versions and then followed up. So one of the things that we wanted to do is make things a little easier to work with, like parallel tracks, and this comes in handy in a number of different ways. One of them could be using, if you're tracking a band, or if you could have kind of different scenarios here. So let's say if I was tracking a band, and we'll just have this as an audio file that's being generated from Groove Agent SE, but imagine if it was a live band or something like that. So what we're going to do is we're going to I place all these tracks into a folder, and then I'm just going to go ahead and we'll listen to, let me just set my routing here. Sorry about that. So you guys can hear it. So if I wanted to just record, so I'm going to go ahead and let's say record 4 measures of this drum pattern here. And let's say the band is recording and this is now take 1. Okay, and I'm just going to do that again, and we'll set our out point here. So I'm going to just set a punch out, and that just happens right at my right locator when I hit O or enable this on my transport. So we're going to do this one more time. Sorry about that. All right, and if I wanted to now keep all these here as an idea, but come up with a new parallel version, but maybe I wanted to use that, I'm going to go to my project menu here and go to track versions and say new track version. So I'm going to just select all these tracks here. Just let me select them all. So go to project and new version. So now if I don't see it, that just means we don't hear it. So I'll go to my second idea here, play that, and we'll go ahead and just record. All right, now we can do that. Now another way is if you go to the track versions inspector here and then just choose new version right from there. And let's say our third idea. And we'll record that. And let's do just a fourth idea, and I could just do this by Control-Shift-N as the keyboard shortcut. So there's 3 different ways of setting up track versions. So we'll go ahead and play this, our last idea. So let's say our band has now done 4 different takes. And now if I wanted to switch between these different track versions, now all I have to do is come right here and say, oh, let's go to version 1. And we can do the idea 3, version 3, version 4, or version 2. And all those will just switch and be kind of associated together. Now, if I wanted to just select just a kick drum from version 3, let's say if they're all, if they're in a group folder, I could actually just come here, and as we select all of them within a group will change. But if I turn that off and just have one track selected, I can say, let's listen to the kick from track 3, or the open hi-hat from take 4. And then you can mix and match different takes from different tracks. So if we wanted to do this, we can now also kind of build a best of feature. So I want to take this first one, I'm going to duplicate that version. And now, since we're here, we could say, I want to go to take 2, and I'm going to just select all these. So when I switch to take 2, they'll all be associated with the same track. I'm going to grab my range selection tool, select take 2, and I'm going to copy, just Control C, and go to almost my duplicate version of that. So we'll say, okay, paste, and let's come right here, copy, paste, copy the last measure, paste. So now I could have take 1 going seamlessly into take 2, into take 3, followed by 4. Now what's interesting is this isn't just limited to being with audio, because I could actually now, and we had questions about kind of the visibility settings, and we'll get into this in just a minute. If I wanted to take just an actual MIDI part here, say that from our chord track that we're listening to before, if I solo the harp part, I could have different versions of the harp part. So you say, oh, maybe I like this idea, or maybe I like this idea. So instead of having 2 different tracks, you gotta have one track with different ideas. Now, as I do this also, I could have different track versions for not only audio or MIDI, but different chord tracks. Let's try an F sharp. Or if I want to have different tempo tracks. So it gets to be like a really creative way of trying out different ideas, so you never really have to make a commitment. So it comes in handy. Now we had a question about track visibility. We'll get into this, and then we'll get into some of the tempo questions that are coming up. So if we want to take a look at some of the track visibility, and what's cool about this is we can have, and this was first introduced in the mix console, and then what we wanted to do is to actually incorporate this into the project window as well, because we have composers working with really large numbers of tracks. So we'll take some footage from a Charlie Chaplin movie here, but let's say in this scenario I have a lot of different bass tracks and keyboard parts, and these are all kind of in folders, harp, different guitar parts. So now if I wanted to take this, I could click on the visibility tab here on my main project window. And if they're in folders, this is really convenient because you could just hold down Shift and click, and that will select only the tracks that are in that folder. And I could go to my configurations here, and we'll just call this drums. And we'll come here to, let's say, our bass parts. And again, Shift. and select. So these, we'll call this a configuration of bass. And we'll create a configuration here for keys. And say harp. Guitars. Vocals. And we'll say some voiceover. So now as I'm kind of playing my project, you could actually see kind of all of our, just our different tracks here. And now what's handy about this is we can just isolate physically by view our different tracks. Now if you just go to the right hand side, you'll see this little icon. This would allow you to sync the track visibility settings with the mix console. So now as soon as I hold down my mixer, I would see only those particular tracks. And if I wanted to go to all of my vocal parts and I go to my mix console, you'd now see only those parts for the vocals. Now the visibility options also have some interesting settings because you could have some different agents. So again, this is kind of a little subtle thing, but just to the right of the visibility, and that's where you could choose to synchronize it with your mix console. Now, if you come here, you could also just come right here and say, okay, I only want to see tracks where the cursor where there's data at the cursor position. It will hide every single track that's not playing at that moment in time. Or if you have a large template for, if you're a composer, you can say, show me only tracks that have data on them. And that will hide all your tracks that don't have data. So you have some really clever kind of options there for viewing what you want to do. And then you could also come over here and you could set up your own project logical editor where you can say, show me only tracks that have the letters VO in the name. And that would allow you to, show your vocals or Vox tracks just like that. All right, so we'll do some tempo things. I'm going to just review here real quick, and we'll see if there's any other little quick questions that have come in. Okay, a real quick question on external effects routing, such as your the Crane Song unit. If you wanted to use external devices, all you had to do is go into the device menu to VST connections, and you will be able to go right here to external effects. So we can say we want to add an external effect. So let's say we want to add the head 192. All right, and what you can do is actually just assign these, if it's a stereo in or out, or mono in and out, or 8 ins, 8 outs, whatever. Assign those into the inputs and outputs of your audio interface where they're connected. And now you'll just come right here, and let's say if I go to my inspector, I go to my inserts, and then we can go to your external effects, your external plugins, and then you would see your HEDD 192, your Crane Song unit. Now, one of the things is it will automatically determine the latency of the audio interface buffers. But sometimes, especially with like a reverb unit, there could be additional capability, additional latencies. So what you have here is a little ping. So if you actually just kind of click on that ping, what that's going to enable you to do is that will send a signal out through the entire signal flow of that device and automatically compensate for the hardware latencies as well. So you could use your hardware plugins as easily as your software plugins, just connected directly into your audio interface. All right, so I see a question on the arranger track. We'll get to that. All right, so let's do a little bit of tempo handling. Let me see. I think I have a project that. Let me just take a quick look. Okay, there's a tremendous amount of tempo manipulation that you could do within Cubase. Now, one of the tricks is you don't necessarily have to go through every single hit point and be able to find all that. As long as you have kind of just tempo stamps within your audio files, you're able to kind of do a tremendous amount. So if you come over here to your pool window, one of the things like you can see right here is you'll see a tempo field within the audio pool and a mode here called musical mode. So if I wanted to select all the audio files, and if I know what what you need to do is to set kind of the origin tempo. So if you know that, this audio file is at, a loop at 80 beats a minute, this one's 100 beats a minute, this one's 72, or if you've recorded all your files at 72 beats a minute, you could place them into musical mode. You could tell the audio files to do that. So you could do it globally within a pool, or as you're working, you could also just select an audio file here and place it into musical mode. Now there's two different time modes within Cubase. So one will be called musical mode, the other is called linear mode. And you can toggle the time base on the tracks right here. So when you see a quarter note icon here, that means it's in musical mode. And that means that the timing is tied to the bar in beat position. When it's set to, when you see a little clock, that track is set to linear mode, and that's set to the actual time value. So if I change the tempo of a track that's in linear mode, it won't necessarily change the positioning of those events. But if it's in musical mode, I could come here, let's say we're listening to this track, and I want it to be a different tempo. I could just, since we're all in musical mode here, I could say, let's just put it in 88 beats a minute here in my transport, and hit enter. Or if I want to be 64 beats a minute. But you could just come right here and just change the tempo. So that way every single audio file can automatically just kind of change. Now, if you come here, if you have a tempo map, you could also just draw in tempo changes here. So once it's in musical mode, it will kind of just follow whatever tempo changes. And that's great if your files actually kind of start off with, if they're all kind of like one steady tempo. Now we had a quick question about how to do a quick tap tempo. I think it was Sir Robert from Atlanta. Good to see you on board. Let me just kind of scroll back. I think we had a question of showing tap tempo. So one way of doing it is you could actually just kind of go here to your beat calculator, and you could click on tap tempo and just with your space bar, just kind of tap it in. So if you say, oh, I'm looking for a feel like that, you say, oh, it's around 117. So that's one way of doing it. Now, another way, now a lot of times when you're dealing with different music, you realize that perhaps the original tracks weren't played in time originally. So if I wanted to come here, let's say where the tracks weren't recorded with a click track, and the musicians, every beat is slightly different tempo. And this is very common, especially with live musicians. So if we want to come here, let me just remove a couple tracks. So let's say we have this session here.
1, 2, 3, 4.
And they're not really playing with the click track. So if I just solo my mandolin part here, there's no real correlation between those two. So what I could do is just select the audio file, And from our project menu, I'm just going to say tempo detection. And I'm going to say analyze. So we do that. And now when we listen to it, it's now figured out an analysis of the mandolin part. And let's say the other parts are all kind of playing in time. And it's automatically giving me a 1/4 measure, because we don't assume that all your music's in 4/4, 3/4, 5/4. So here, if I want to set it to be, so I think we actually have like a little count in from the vocal mic here.
Turning Japanese, I think.
It's a little.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, so if I wanted to kind of just zoom in,
2, 1.
and we'll say, okay, right here is where our 4/4 bar starts. We'll just kind of zoom in again.
1, 2.
Right at measure 10. So I'm just going to come here, turn on our snap, and we'll have our 4/4 bar right there. We'll just cancel that, sorry. And as we look at this,
1, 2, 3, 4.
so if I wanted to now add a drum loop to this, I can now come right over here and let's say, okay, I just want to go to my media bay. And let's find a drum loop. So just double click, we'll add that drum loop. And we're going to make sure that this drum loop falls on the beat. So I'm going to just kind of select this part. I'll say right at measure 10. And we're going to make sure that this is into musical mode. We'll duplicate this a couple times. And this may not work groove-wise, but this will give you an idea. So as we kind of start off.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4.
So now I'm just going to take these here and we're going to just boost their volume here. Just so you can hear. And that drum loop will automatically follow that particular track because that's going to speed up and slow down to match whatever tempo we have. So even though we have our varying tempo, that drum loop is going to speed up and slow down to match. But if I wanted the original musicians, and this is kind of a cool thing where you get stuck a lot, if I wanted the original tracks to actually, instead of having their varying tempo, play back to a steady tempo, I'm going to go to my audio menu to advanced and say, let's set definition from tempo. And what this is going to do is, instead of having one static value for my tempo change, it's going to actually have write all the metadata of all the tempo changes here on every single beat, so that when I open up my console, my transport here,
Left the $20 bill on the nightstand. Wonder she's searching
and whatever tempo I kind of type in here,
with me. Another heartbreak, another day of this. I'm pretty sure I can't take another day
156 or 96.
without song. 4 years later, it can take another day, but the love we used to make ain't no good for me.
So if you want it to be a fixed tempo of audio is recorded at any tempo, like 128,
Met a girl for an only one night stand. Left a $20 bill on the nightstand.
so that way you could kind of take, audio that's a different tempos, have them all kind of be consolidated to one master tempo. If the audio was varying tempo, you could have it automatically fit. So it's very, very easy. So I know that we have a bit of a delay here, so we'll, so I see a question about the vocoder. I think if you go through the legacy plugins, now one of the things in setting up a vocoder that a lot of people miss is you need kind of a MIDI track to actually kind of get the vocoder set up. So if you have, let's say, a vocoder set up on this track, I don't think I have one installed on my system, but you would often need to then add a MIDI track, and that MIDI track set the output, and then you would often see the vocoder as a port. So that MIDI data is then sent to kind of the synthesis engine of the vocoder to determine what pitches to generate from the vocoder. I believe, I know in earlier versions, I haven't checked recently, like in Cubase 5 and Cubase 6 on the installation DVD, there are some legacy plugins, so you might find a vocoder in there. But generally you would need another MIDI track with the output set. So once that vocoder is enabled, at that point you could actually see, you'd see that as a MIDI port that could send the MIDI information to the vocoder plugin to actually kind of trigger that. All right, so I know we have a little bit of delay. I'll kind of go through a couple of more questions. We'll see if we get some more. So I see a question from Rower K about dragging the playlist. I'm not sure what you mean by the Cubase playlist. Are those just different? Are those different Cubase projects? If so, you might want to just right-click on the project. If it was used to be like where you could just kind of drag and drop it into Cubase. So playlists to me is kind of like different orders of songs, like in like a iTunes playlist, something like that. But if you're trying to drag the project files and it's not launching Cubase, try right-clicking and say launch with and set the appropriate version of Cubase if you want to kind of get to the point where you actually set that, if you want to clarify that a little bit. I think we let me just go through and see. We had a quick question about using the arranger track for different mixes. We'll show that. It was from Jimmy in Atlanta. Let me just find a particular file here. So a lot of people want to work, Cubase was really the first program that had a true linear functionality where we could actually see all of our parts kind of come in and out of time. But one of the things that we wanted to do is to make it work in a non-linear fashion as well. So we have something called the arranger track, and this allows you to come up with different ideas pretty quickly. So you can add an arranger track, and once you have that open, we could grab your pencil tool and automatically kind of define parts. So you can say this is a chorus or a verse, or I like this little breakdown within the chorus or verse. So you have parts and nested parts and parts within parts, etc. And once you have all of your parts set up, you can see all of your arranger parts here, and they could be labeled, and you could actually just come right over here and create different arrangements. So to activate this, you need to right click on the actual transport bar, and you'll see an arranger section right here. So once this icon is turned on, it will now play back in non-linear fashion. So if I want to come here and try, and you can have multiple different play orders, and now as I hit play,
All at once you kissed my face. The world was like a brand new place. Felt my fears all fly away. Don't it make it fall?
so instead of playing linearly through, it'll just kind of follow different chains here. Instead of playing straight on,
All at once you kissed my
Get to have
face.
it.
The world was like a brand new place. Felt my fears all fly away. Don't it make it feel good? Knowing that somebody wants to give you their heart. Feel good.
So once you have kind of an arrangement, and you know, if you want to play back all the parts linearly, you can do that. You want to play back non-linearly to try out different ideas. It's really, really slick for that. And if I wanted to, I could also just say flatten chain. And what that's going to do is going to take my non-linear arrangement and copy all the parts out as if I kind of did all those rearrangements and edits completely on the fly like that. So the arranger track is really pretty incredible way of working with, you know, in both a non-linear and linear world, kind of the best of both environments in one tool. So really powerful tool to kind of check out. All right, so we'll go through, see if there's a couple. All right, let me try exporting a MIDI file real quick here. Give me just 1 second. Let me just. I'll try to drag and drop. So I'm going to export a MIDI file. And I think what you might need to do, we'll do it to desktop. We'll just do a test MIDI. And let me just kind of go to my desktop view and see if I can just drag that test MIDI. Let me see if I can find it real quick. My messy desktop. All right, so I'm just going to come here. Yeah, so there's my MIDI data. So I'm not sure kind of what drag and drop functionality. I can maybe do a little more research if you wanted to send me a message offline, but it seems to be kind of working here. All right. Yep. So here's the MIDI files. You'll see it in just a second. I dragged in from my desktop, so it seemed to kind of work kind of as expected. If you want to, you know, you could maybe one thing that you could do is as you start the Cubase in 7.5, if you start, or I believe in Cubase 7, if you actually wanted to try to see if it is a preference issue, if you start Cubase, then right after you, on the Windows side, if you double click and hold down Alt Control Shift, you could actually start it with the default preferences. So you can see if that affects your MIDI file right there. All right, we'll probably just see my project window come back here soon. I'm going to go through, check out any more questions. Okay, we're just about ready to wrap up. Any additional quick questions? We'll wait a couple minutes for the buffer to kind of catch up. I'd like to thank you guys for coming, check it out. If you have any just last minute quick questions, I'll hang out for a minute and we'll just kind of find out. All right, we have a question from Anna's Studio, so about what's new, that you're new to Cubase and what's a MIDI file. A MIDI file is just kind of a standard interchange format to take MIDI from different sequencers, from hardware sequencers or different software sequencers. So it's kind of a way to kind of move MIDI information from one one program to another program, or different MIDI loops. Okay, Nathan, if you could ask your very audio question one more time, I'll try to go back, see if I can. Sorry that I missed it. All right, I'll just kind of hang out. I'm kind of going back through some of the questions so I could catch Nathan's question about the very audio. Just scrolling back. But Nathan, if you want to retype your question, I'm sorry if I missed it twice. There's a lot of questions coming in. All right, I'm just going back through some of the questions. Okay, I see. Okay, I was just going back here. Give me just 1 second. Okay, so in regards to your very audio, if it's not manually detecting something, like sometimes you may have like a consonant or something like that. So sometimes what you may need to do is just to kind of to move that consonant, and then if you wanted to, let me just see if I get the see if I could find my keyboard shortcut here. I think if you go to segments mode, you may just want to hold down just the Alt key, and sometimes that can kind of join the different segments together. And then if you wanted to come here, and then you could, once you go back to your pitch and warp mode, you can also just kind of adjust kind of the fine tuning here. So, or also if you wanted to just kind of straighten the pitch on just a particular segment as well. So those are some of the tools you could do if you have kind of improperly detected pitches. Sorry about that, Nathan, I missed it. All right, so we had a question about Groove Agent 4. We'll probably be able to show that maybe next time. So we'll look forward to that. All right, so it's running a little bit late. I have to get going home. I'd like to thank everyone. We'll just kind of hang out here for a minute just in case there's a couple more last-minute questions. I'd like to thank everyone for hanging out during the Google Hangout. I hope everyone learned a thing or two. If you have just a last-minute question, I'll hang out just for another minute, and then we'll wrap up. Thanks again for joining the Google Hangout. Let your friends know if you found it helpful. I know sometimes there's a bit of a delay. We can't really help that. So it's kind of the nature of the beast, but I appreciate everyone's patience in dealing with it. I hope I got through most of your questions and that everyone was able to learn a couple things. So just if there's a last minute really quick question, be happy to field that. If not, we'll wrap it up and we'll see you next month. And some of you will see in person. So I'll just hang out here for a minute. Thanks for the kind words. It's a little tricky format to do a demo in, but we're trying to get it a little better. Thanks. Quick question to Anna Studio. You probably would want to do like deleting breaths probably on the main project window. And sometimes you don't necessarily want to delete breaths, but just kind of minimize them. Otherwise, it sounds a little bit out of context. But that's probably best done on the main project window. All right. Yeah, this is a nice comment from Jimmy George. He started a nice Cubase Facebook page that's been helping out a lot of people called the Cubase Academy. We've been being able to help out some people there. All right. We'll wait in our minutes. See if there's a last minute question that pops up. If not, we'll just kind of wrap it up. Okay, just a real quick question about the gain and send. Sometimes it just gives you some additional kind of, gain structure changes. So if you needed to, if your audio interface wasn't the same impedance as your piece of external gear, you could give it a little more gain to kind of properly match levels, to optimize the levels for hardware, and that's why you see the gain and send settings. All right, with that, we'll wrap up. We went about 2 hours, 20 minutes. Thank you, everyone. I hope you all learned something, and hopefully we'll see you next time we do a Google Hangout. Thank you very much. Bye.